you ever thought about how much power your words hold? Not just the power to influence others, but the power to shape your own life. Join me as I challenge myself to avoid saying the 11 things that intelligent people never say for a whole day. As I've navigated my own journey through Stoicism, one of the most profound lessons I've learned is that our words reflect our thoughts, and our thoughts shape our reality. The way we speak to others and to ourselves matters more than we often realize. Before we start, leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support our content. Now, let's get straight to the point. I remember a time when I was in a conversation that took a wrong turn. I said something without thinking that I immediately regretted. It was one of those moments where the words left my mouth before my mind could catch up. The person I was speaking to paused. Their expression changed, and I realized instantly that my words had caused harm. It wasn't even something harsh or angry. It was just careless. That day, I went home feeling unsettled. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my mind, wishing I had chosen my words more wisely. This is when Stoicism began to take on a new meaning for me. I had read the works of Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, but it wasn't until that moment that I truly grasped the importance of controlling what I say. Epictetus once said, "First learn the meaning of what you say, and then speak." This quote stuck with me. How often do we speak without really thinking? How often do we let our emotions or impulsiveness dictate our words? From that moment, I started paying closer attention to what I said. And through this journey, I discovered the things that intelligent people who are emotionally wise and mindful, never say. Today, I want to share those with you. Before we delve into the 11 things intelligent people never say, let me tell you a story. In a prosperous kingdom, nestled between high mountains and lush valleys, there lived a king renowned for his wisdom, fairness, and thoughtful leadership. His name was King Aaron. Unlike many rulers who sought glory through conquest or lavish displays of wealth, Aaron valued humility, introspection, and meaningful dialogue. His people admired him not only for his strength but for the calm wisdom he displayed in every decision he made. One day, word spread that a new advisor had arrived in the kingdom. This advisor, known as Gadon, had gained a reputation in distant lands for his bold claims and ostentatious demeanor. Gadon had a talent for making grand statements, often boasting of his knowledge and foresight. It wasn't long before he sought an audience with the wise King Aaron. When Gadon entered the grand hall, he immediately began speaking with great flair. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice booming through the hall, "I have traveled far and wide. I know the secrets to happiness and success. I can predict the future, and if you listen to my advice, your kingdom will prosper in ways you could never imagine." The king, seated calmly on his throne, listened with curiosity. He gestured for Gadon to continue. "The path to power is through indulgence," Gadon exclaimed with a dramatic sweep of his arms. "Lavish parties, endless entertainment, and surrounding yourself with flatterers. This is how you will ensure loyalty and admiration. A ruler must show strength through excess, not through restraint. Only by embracing luxury and grandeur can you maintain control over your people." King Aaron, known for his stoic nature, remained silent for a moment, contemplating the words of his new advisor. The hall was quiet, save for the sound of the flickering torches that lined the stone walls. Finally, the king spoke. "Your words are bold, Gadon. You claim to know the secrets to lasting success, but I wonder, do you truly understand the nature of happiness and power?" Gadon, filled with self-assurance, nodded vigorously. "Of course, Your Majesty. I have seen rulers rise and fall, and I can assure you that those who indulge in the pleasures of life hold the greatest power." The king smiled, not with amusement, but with a kind of patient understanding. "Very well, Gadon. I invite you to join me tonight for a banquet. Let us dine and continue this discussion." That evening, Gadon arrived at the palace, expecting to be greeted by a magnificent feast. He imagined tables overflowing with the finest meats, wines, and delicacies from across the land. Yet, when he entered the banquet hall, he was taken aback. Instead of the grand spectacle he envisioned, he found a simple table set with humble food, fresh bread, modest portions of vegetables and water. There were no lavish decorations, no music, and no extravagant displays. Seated at the table were the king and his most trusted counselors, men and women known not for their wealth or titles but for their wisdom and integrity. They spoke in low, thoughtful tones, discussing philosophy, the nature of virtue, and the importance of self-control. King Aaron welcomed Gadon warmly. "Please sit and join us," the king said, gesturing to an empty seat. Gadon, though puzzled by the simplicity of the setting, took his place at the table. As the meal progressed, the king and his counselors engaged in deep conversations. They spoke of the transient nature of life, the value of humility, and the importance of focusing on internal virtues rather than chasing external validation. They discussed how true happiness comes not from indulgence or material wealth, but from self-awareness, discipline, and a connection to one's higher purpose. Gadon, who had been so eager to impress the king with his bold ideas, found himself growing increasingly uncomfortable. He had expected flattery and praise, but what he witnessed was something deeper, wisdom grounded in experience and thoughtful reflection. The king and his counselors spoke not to impress one another but to learn and grow together. At one point, King Aaron turned to Gadon and said, "Tell me, Gadon, what do you make of our conversation? Do you believe that happiness and power come from surrounding oneself with flatterers and indulging in excess, as you suggested earlier?" Gadon hesitated. The simplicity of the meal, the depth of the discussion, it was all so different from what he had imagined. I had not considered this perspective, Your Majesty," Gadon stammered. "Perhaps there is more to life than outward displays of power and wealth." The king nodded, his expression kind but firm. "A wise person understands that true happiness comes from within, not from external validation or material wealth. Epictetus once said, 'Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants.' You see, Gadon, true strength lies in mastering oneself, in recognizing that the things we chase in the external world are often fleeting." As the evening wore on, Gadon found himself reflecting on the king's words. He had spent so much of his life boasting of his knowledge and seeking validation through grand statements and superficial achievements. Yet, in this simple meal, in these meaningful conversations, he saw the wisdom of focusing on what truly matters: virtue, self-control, and thoughtful communication. By the end of the banquet, Gadon felt humbled. He had come to the king with boastful claims, but he now realized how much he had to learn. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "I see now that I have been a fool. I have spoken without thought and sought validation through empty words. I am grateful for the lesson you have taught me tonight." King Aaron smiled, his eyes filled with understanding. "We are all learning, Gadon. The path to wisdom is not about knowing everything but about being willing to listen and grow. Seneca once said, 'It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it.' You still have time to walk the path of wisdom, but it begins with humility and self-awareness." Gadon bowed his head, his heart filled with gratitude. He had come to the king with arrogance, but he left with a newfound sense of purpose. He vowed to change his ways, to listen more and speak less, to seek wisdom over validation, and to focus on what truly mattered. The story of the wise king and the foolish advisor is a reminder to all of us that intelligence is not measured by how much we know or how loudly we speak. It is measured by our willingness to listen, to reflect, and to engage in meaningful conversations that help us grow. The king's wisdom lay not in grandiose displays of power, but in his quiet strength, his humility, and his focus on internal virtues. As we go through life, it's easy to get caught up in the noise, to seek validation from others, or to speak without thinking. But Stoicism teaches us to focus on what truly matters, to cultivate self-awareness, humility, and meaningful connections. In the end, it is not the external things that bring us happiness, but the internal virtues we develop along the way. So, the next time you find yourself tempted to speak without thought or to seek approval through empty words, remember the wise king's lesson. True wisdom lies in humility, self-awareness, and thoughtful communication. As we dive into the core of today's lesson, we enter the real challenge, the words we choose not to say. You see, it's not just about knowing what to say in any situation, but more importantly, it's about knowing what not to say. Through my journey with Stoicism, I've learned that the most intelligent people are the ones who've mastered the art of silence, who understand the immense power in restraint and in leaving certain things unsaid. Let's explore 3 key phrases that intelligent people avoid. 3 phrases that once shaped my life until I learned the wisdom of keeping them unspoken. And trust me, each of these took me time to unlearn, but once I did, the impact was transformative. The first phrase intelligent people never say is simple but profound. I can't do this. It's something I used to say all the time, especially when I was overwhelmed. Maybe you've felt it too, that sinking feeling in your chest when you're facing a challenge that seems way too big, too complicated, or just downright impossible. It's natural, right? But here's what I discovered. When you say, I can't, you're building walls around yourself, confining your potential. You're shutting down your ability to even try. I remember a time early in my career when I faced a huge project. I wasn't ready, or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. I said it to my friends, my colleagues. I can't do this. And every time those words left my mouth, they became more real. My mind started to believe them. I started to shrink. My fear grew, and before I knew it, I was paralyzed by those 3 words. That's when Stoicism changed everything for me. I came across this idea in Epictetus's teachings. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. It hit me like a bolt of lightning. The moment I stopped saying, I can't, and replaced it with, let's see what I can do, my world opened up. Suddenly, the challenges didn't seem so insurmountable. Suddenly, it wasn't about being perfect, but about trying. And that's the key. Intelligent people never close the door on possibility. They know that even the hardest tasks start with a single step, and by keeping the door open, they allow themselves to grow, to learn, and to overcome. What I realized is that when we say, I can't, we're not just limiting our actions, we're limiting our mind. And as the Stoics teach us, the mind is where everything begins. The next time you feel like saying, I can't, stop, take a breath, reframe your thoughts. Ask yourself, what can I do right now? You'll be amazed at how your mindset shifts when you stop reinforcing the negative and start focusing on the possible. Now, the second phrase is one that feels like a shield, but it's really a prison. That's just who I am. I used to say this a lot, especially when I didn't want to change, when I was stuck in old habits that weren't serving me. I'd snap at someone in frustration or avoid taking risks, and then I'd justify it by saying, that's just who I am. It felt like an excuse that freed me from having to evolve, but in reality, it was holding me back. Think about it, how often do we hear this phrase or even say it ourselves when we're faced with criticism or the need to grow? We use it as a defense mechanism, as if who we are is set in stone, as if we're incapable of change. But here's the truth that Stoicism reveals. We are constantly changing, constantly evolving. To say, that's just who I am, is to deny our potential, to ignore the fact that we are always becoming. I once read this beautiful line from Seneca, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. It was a reminder that who we are today doesn't have to be who we are tomorrow. In fact, it shouldn't be. The journey of life is one of continual transformation. When I stopped clinging to this phrase, that's just who I am, I started to see opportunities for growth in every aspect of my life. I became more open to feedback, more willing to adapt, and ultimately more self-aware. Intelligent people never say, that's just who I am, because they know that true intelligence lies in adaptability, in the willingness to change. The next time you catch yourself saying these words, pause. Ask yourself, is this really who I want to be? You have the power to redefine yourself every day. And the Stoics remind us that self-awareness is the first step toward wisdom. Don't trap yourself in the past version of you. Embrace the potential for growth that each moment offers. The third phrase I want to explore is one we all know too well. That's not my fault. This one is sneaky because it feels like self-preservation, but in reality, it's avoidance. I can't count the number of times I used this phrase to dodge responsibility when things went wrong. It's easy, isn't it? When a situation goes sideways, When something doesn't go according to plan, we immediately want to distance ourselves. That's not my fault, we say, and we feel safe for a moment. But in truth, we're running from growth. The turning point for me came during a project at work. Something fell through, and my first instinct was to point the finger elsewhere. That wasn't my fault, I thought, and for a while I even believed it. But as I reflected on the situation, something shifted. I realized that while I may not have been entirely to blame, there was something I could have done differently. And in that realization, I found the freedom to grow. Stoicism teaches us that we must take ownership of our part in every situation, no matter how small. Epictetus said, "We are not disturbed by things, but by the views we take of them." When we refuse to take responsibility, we're choosing to remain blind to our own potential. By saying, "That's not my fault," we block ourselves from learning valuable lessons that could help us avoid the same mistake in the future. Now, I'm not saying you should take the blame for everything, but there's a profound difference between deflecting blame and accepting responsibility for what you can control. Intelligent people understand this. They don't waste time pointing fingers. They focus on what they can learn from the situation. And that's the essence of Stoicism, focusing on what's within your control. You can't change the past, and sometimes things happen that aren't entirely your fault. But you can always change how you respond, how you grow, and what you take away from the experience. When I stopped saying, "That's not my fault," I started seeing challenges as opportunities for growth. I began to ask myself, what can I do better next time? It was a humbling experience, but one that led to incredible personal growth. So, the next time you're tempted to deflect blame, take a moment to reflect. What can you learn? How can you grow? Because true intelligence isn't about avoiding fault. It's about embracing responsibility. Before we go on with the list, let me take you through one of the most transformative moments in my journey, my own personal breakthrough. It was a time when I had to face some of the hardest truths about myself. A time when I realized just how much my own words were holding me back. For a long time, I found myself trapped in a cycle of self-doubt. Every time a new opportunity came my way, my first instinct wasn't to embrace it but to hesitate. I would tell myself, "I'm not ready," or "What if I fail?" It was like my mind had built these invisible walls around me, walls made entirely out of words I had repeated to myself over and over until I started believing them. One moment in particular stands out. I was offered the chance to lead a new project, something I had always dreamed of doing. But instead of feeling excited, I felt fear. My mind started running through all the reasons I wasn't qualified. What if I mess it up? What if everyone sees that I don't know what I'm doing? I even said it out loud to a colleague. "I can't do this." And in that moment, I felt like I had sealed my own fate. By saying those words, I had already failed. But then something shifted. I remembered a passage I had read from Epictetus. "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." It hit me like a wave. My belief that I couldn't do it wasn't based on fact. It was based on fear. And by clinging to that fear, by saying, "I can't," I was closing myself off from learning, from growing, from even trying. I decided then and there to change my approach. Instead of saying, "I can't," I told myself, "Let's see what happens if I try." It was a simple shift, but it made all the difference. I stopped focusing on the possibility of failure and started focusing on the possibility of growth. I took on the project, and while it wasn't perfect, it became one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. Not because of the outcome, but because of the mindset I adopted along the way. Stoicism teaches us that the way we speak to ourselves shapes our reality. When we choose limiting words, we create a limiting life. But when we let go of those limiting beliefs, we open the door to possibility. This was my breakthrough, realizing that the words I had been telling myself weren't facts. They were just fears disguised as facts. And once I let them go, I found a freedom I never knew I had. As I began to embrace the power of my words, I started to notice other phrases that were quietly undermining my growth. Phrases I used to say without even thinking. These phrases were like small cracks in the foundation of my confidence. But once I became aware of them, I could replace them with words that reflected strength, resilience, and purpose. Let's look at 2 more things intelligent people never say, and why letting go of these phrases can make all the difference. So, the phrase number 4 is a common one. I'm not ready yet. I used to say this every time I faced something new or unfamiliar. It became my go-to excuse, my way of putting things off until I felt more comfortable. But the problem with this phrase is that it keeps us stuck. It tricks us into believing that someday we'll feel completely prepared, that there will be a perfect moment when all the stars align, and we'll finally be ready to take that leap. But let me tell you, there's no such thing. I remember a time when I was offered an opportunity to give a public talk. It was something I had always wanted to do, but the moment the offer came, my mind was flooded with reasons why I wasn't ready. I told myself I needed more time, more practice, more experience. I kept waiting for that elusive moment when I would feel 100% prepared. But it never came. The truth is, no matter how much time I gave myself, I would never feel fully ready. I had to accept that. It wasn't until I came across a lesser-known quote from Marcus Aurelius that everything shifted. He wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." It dawned on me. My fear of not being ready was the very thing holding me back. I was waiting for a feeling of readiness that would never arrive. The obstacle itself was my path. So I stopped waiting. I stopped saying, "I'm not ready," and I started saying, "Let's go, even if I'm scared." And once I took that step, I realized something incredible. The very act of doing, of facing the challenge, was what made me ready. Intelligent people know this. They understand that readiness isn't a state of being, it's a state of doing. You become ready by taking action, not by waiting for the perfect moment. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "I'm not ready yet," remember this. The only way to get ready is to begin. The 5th phrase we need to let go of is, "That's impossible." It's a phrase that cuts off possibility before it even has a chance to form. I used to say this a lot, especially when faced with something that felt overwhelming or beyond my capabilities. It was my way of giving up before I even tried. "That's impossible," I'd say, and in that moment, I had already decided the outcome. But here's the thing, what we think is impossible is often just beyond the limits of our current understanding. One day, I came across this insight from Epictetus. Difficulties are things that show a person what they are. This struck me deeply. Every time I labeled something as impossible, I was missing the opportunity to discover what I was truly capable of. I was letting my fear of failure dictate my reality, instead of allowing the challenge to reveal my inner strength. I remember a specific challenge I faced a few years ago. It was a project that required a skill set I didn't have at the time. My initial reaction was, "That's impossible." I felt overwhelmed just thinking about it. But then I stopped myself. I thought about the Stoic approach, focusing not on the outcome but on the process. Instead of asking whether it was possible, I asked myself, what's the first step I can take? That small shift in mindset was everything. I stopped focusing on the end result and started focusing on the journey. And guess what? What I had once thought was impossible became something I could manage, step by step. It wasn't easy, and it took time, but I got there. And in the process, I learned that the limits we place on ourselves are often self-imposed. So, the next time you think, "That's impossible," ask yourself, what can I do today to move forward, even just a little? Intelligent people know that impossibility is often just another word for unexplored potential. Let's now talk about the 6th phrase, "I don't have time for this." I can't tell you how many times I've used this phrase, especially when I felt overwhelmed by life's demands. Whether it was a project, a relationship, or even my own self-care, I would often dismiss important things by saying, "I don't have time for this." But what I learned through Stoicism is that this phrase is rarely about time, it's about priorities. There was a period in my life when I felt like I was constantly running out of time. Every day felt like a race, and there never seemed to be enough hours to get everything done. I would push aside things that mattered, like spending time with loved ones or taking care of my mental and physical health, because I convinced myself I didn't have time. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. It wasn't that I didn't have time. It was that I wasn't making time for the things that truly mattered. I came across this powerful quote from Seneca. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. That hit me hard. It wasn't that I didn't have time. It was that I was wasting it on things that didn't align with my values. I was letting distractions, trivial tasks, and unnecessary obligations eat away at my day, leaving little room for what was truly important. Once I realized this, I started to change how I approached my time. Instead of saying, "I don't have time for this," I started asking myself, "Is this worth my time?" And when I framed it that way, I began to see my time as something I had control over, something I could choose to spend wisely. Intelligent people understand that time is their most valuable resource, and they make intentional choices about how they use it. So the next time you feel overwhelmed and tempted to say, "I don't have time for this," pause and ask yourself, what am I choosing to prioritize? You have more control over your time than you think, and by choosing wisely, you create a life that aligns with your values and goals. As I progressed on my journey of self-awareness and thoughtful communication, I started to realize just how much the words we choose to say, or not to say, shape our lives. Every phrase, every sentence has the power to either build us up or tear us down. And as we've seen, intelligent people understand this. They've mastered the art of choosing words that empower, rather than weaken them. But there are still a few more phrases we need to look at. Phrases that, once I let them go, completely transformed my perspective. Let's dive into the final 3 things intelligent people never say, and how they taught me to reshape my thinking and approach life with more clarity and strength. Let's start with the 7th phrase I used to say all the time. This is unfair. We've all been there, haven't we? Life throws something at you. A setback, a disappointment, a betrayal, and our first instinct is to shout, "This isn't fair." It's such a natural reaction. We're wired to seek fairness, to want things to balance out. But the more I reflected on this phrase, the more I realized how harmful it can be. I remember a specific moment when I felt this more than ever. I had worked hard for months on a project, pouring everything I had into it. But in the end, it didn't turn out the way I had hoped. Things went wrong, things outside of my control. I was frustrated, angry even. I kept thinking, this isn't fair. I did everything right. But the more I fixated on that thought, the more stuck I became. I was so caught up in the injustice of it all that I couldn't move forward. And then I came across a teaching from Seneca. It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. That really hit me. I realized that by focusing on what I thought was unfair, I was feeding a sense of lack, of craving. I was so obsessed with what I didn't get, with the imbalance of it all, that I was blind to what I could learn from the experience. And that's the thing about life, it's rarely fair in the way we want it to be. But fairness isn't the goal. Growth is. I stopped saying, "This is unfair," and started asking, "What can I take from this?" Once I shifted my mindset, I found freedom. The frustration melted away, and I was able to see the opportunity hidden in the struggle. Intelligent people don't waste time complaining about fairness because they know that life's greatest lessons often come from moments that feel unjust. They focus not on the balance of the scales, but on how they can grow stronger from the imbalance. So, the next time you find yourself tempted to say, "This is unfair," stop and ask yourself, what can I learn from this? Because in the end, it's not fairness that shapes us. It's how we respond to the challenges that come our way. The 8th phrase I want to talk about is one I used to hear a lot, especially from those around me. "I'm too old for this." It's such an easy phrase to throw around, isn't it? Whenever we're faced with something new or outside our comfort zone, we use age as a reason to hold back. I've heard people say it about learning a new skill, starting a new hobby, or even taking a different direction in life. And I'll admit I've said it too. But here's what I realized, it's just another excuse. I'll never forget the time I met someone who completely shattered this belief for me. I was at an event, and there was a man in his 70s who had just started learning to play the piano. He had always dreamed of playing, but life had gotten in the way, and he never made the time for it. Now, here he was, decades later, sitting at a piano, fingers trembling slightly as he played his first few notes. I remember asking him, "What made you start now?" And he just smiled and said, "Why not now?" That moment stuck with me. It made me realize that the idea of being too old is just a barrier we create for ourselves. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." And that's the truth of it. We waste so much time convincing ourselves that we've missed our chance, that we're too old to change, to grow, to start something new. But the only time we truly run out of is the time we waste by not trying. Since then, I've stopped thinking in terms of age. I've stopped telling myself, "I'm too old for this," and started asking, "What can I do now with the time I have?" Intelligent people know that growth doesn't have an expiration date. Whether you're 20, 40, or 70, there's always room to learn, to evolve, to try something new. So, if you've been holding yourself back because you think it's too late, I encourage you to rethink that. It's never too late to pursue something that brings you joy or challenges you in a new way. And remember, the clock only runs out when we decide to stop moving. Now, we come to the ninth phrase, one that, in many ways, is the most dangerous. I give up. These three words carry such finality. They're the ultimate surrender, the decision to walk away from something that feels too hard, too painful, or too uncertain. And I'll be honest with you, there have been times in my life when I was right on the edge of saying those words, when things felt so overwhelming that giving up seemed like the only option. But here's what I've learned through Stoicism. I give up isn't just a statement about a specific situation. It's a statement about your mindset. Epictetus once said, "No great thing is created suddenly." And that quote has stayed with me, because every time I felt like giving up, it was because I wanted things to happen faster, to be easier. I wanted immediate results, immediate success. But life doesn't work that way, and neither does personal growth. There was a time when I was working on a project that seemed to be going nowhere. No matter how much effort I put in, no matter how many hours I worked, I wasn't seeing the progress I had hoped for. I remember sitting at my desk late one night, feeling completely defeated. I was so close to saying, "I give up." But then I remembered something a mentor once told me. The only time you truly fail is when you stop trying. That was my turning point. I realized that giving up wasn't an option, not because I had to keep pushing endlessly, but because the act of trying, of persevering, was where the growth was happening. Intelligent people understand that success isn't about never failing. It's about getting back up after every setback. It's about persistence, about continuing to move forward even when the path is unclear. So instead of saying, "I give up," I changed my mindset. I asked myself, what's the next step I can take? And step by step, I started to see progress. It wasn't overnight, and it wasn't easy, but it was worth it. The lesson here is that giving up closes the door on possibility, but persistence keeps it open, even when it feels like the hardest thing to do. So if you're feeling like you've hit a wall, if you're tempted to say, "I give up," I urge you to pause. Take a deep breath and ask yourself, what can I try next? Because as long as you're still trying, you're still moving forward. And that's where the magic happens. As we've gone through these phrases, you may have already started noticing how powerful our words are. Not just in the things we say to others, but in what we say to ourselves. Words can lift us up or they can hold us down. For me, it was a journey of learning how to choose words that helped me grow rather than words that kept me stuck. But there are still two more phrases we need to explore. These phrases may seem harmless at first glance, but once you recognize their impact, you'll see how they subtly chip away at our potential and prevent us from living fully in alignment with the Stoic principles of wisdom and growth. So, let's dive into these final two things that intelligent people never say, and how letting go of them has the power to reshape your future. Have you ever looked at someone else's life and thought, "I wish I had what they have"? Maybe it's a friend with a successful career, or someone on social media with a perfect-looking life, and you catch yourself comparing your journey to theirs. For a long time, I used to do this too. I would scroll through pictures of people traveling the world, or see someone achieve something incredible, and I'd think, why isn't that me? Why can't I have that life? It was such an easy trap to fall into, this constant comparison. But one day, as I was sitting there, feeling like I was missing out on something, I came across a lesser-known teaching by Epictetus. He said, "Do not seek to have events happen as you want them to, but instead want them to happen as they do happen, and your life will go well." That quote hit me in the chest. I realized that every time I said, "I wish I had their life," I was rejecting my own. I was turning away from my unique path, from my own experiences, and instead focusing on what I didn't have. I began to see that the more I wished for someone else's life, the more disconnected I felt from my own purpose. I wasn't embracing the moments and challenges that were shaping me. Instead, I was looking outward to someone else's story, as if their success somehow diminished my own potential. But as the Stoics teach us, comparison is a thief. Seneca once said, "True happiness is to enjoy the present, without anxious dependence on the future." And I realized that comparison is just a way of putting off our own happiness. So, I stopped saying, "I wish I had their life," and started focusing on my own journey. I started asking myself, what do I want my life to look like? What can I do right now to make that happen? And it was in that shift that I found freedom. I no longer felt weighed down by what others were achieving. Instead, I felt empowered to create my own story, to embrace the challenges and the victories of my own path. Intelligent people understand this. They know that looking at someone else's life with envy only distracts them from their own growth. So, the next time you catch yourself saying, "I wish I had their life," pause. Remind yourself that your journey is your own, and that no one else's success can take away from the beauty of what you are building. Comparison leads to dissatisfaction, but gratitude for your own path leads to true fulfillment. And now we come to the last phrase, perhaps the most dangerous one of all, "I'll be happy when." For years, this phrase was like a shadow that followed me everywhere. I'll be happy when I get that promotion. I'll be happy when I buy a house. I'll be happy when I finally achieve this goal. It seemed like every moment of happiness was always in the future, just out of reach, tied to some milestone I hadn't yet accomplished. But here's the thing about saying, "I'll be happy when," keeps you in a perpetual state of waiting. It puts your happiness in the hands of future events, making it something you chase rather than something you experience. And the truth is, even when I did achieve some of those goals, the happiness was fleeting. I'd reach one milestone and immediately shift the goalpost. Okay, but I'll really be happy when I achieve the next thing. It was an endless cycle of striving, but never arriving. That's when I started exploring the Stoic idea of finding contentment in the present moment. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." I realized that happiness isn't something we find outside of ourselves. It's not waiting for us at the end of some achievement or tucked away in some future moment. Happiness is something we cultivate in the present, through our mindset, our thoughts, and our gratitude for what is, rather than what might be. I remember the day I made the conscious decision to stop saying, "I'll be happy when." It wasn't easy. At first, my mind kept drifting back to future goals, to the things I thought would bring me joy. But slowly, I started to focus on the here and now. I asked myself, what can I appreciate about this moment? How can I find contentment in the process, not just the outcome? And something incredible happened. I began to feel more at peace, more grounded in my day-to-day life. I stopped chasing happiness like it was a prize to be won and started experiencing it as something that already existed within me. It was a profound shift, one that has stayed with me ever since. Intelligent people understand this truth. They know that happiness isn't tied to external achievements or future moments. It's found in the way we choose to see the world, in the gratitude we cultivate for the present. So, the next time you catch yourself saying, "I'll be happy when," remind yourself that happiness is not a destination. It's a choice, a mindset, available to you right here, right now. Now that we've explored these 11 things, I want to leave you with a final thought. Mastering your words is about mastering your thoughts. Stoicism teaches us that everything starts in the mind. Our words, our actions, our destiny. By choosing words that empower us, that reflect our inner strength, we create a life that aligns with our highest purpose. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Stoic wisdom. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What's one phrase you've decided to leave behind? Share it in the comments below. And if this video resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to join our growing community of Stoic thinkers and doers. Together, we'll continue to learn, grow, and face life's challenges with wisdom and grace. Until next time, remember, your words have power. Use them wisely.